I think that right now we are in a really strange climate, a really strange environment here. Not even just in the US, but a lot of parts in the world. It's almost this rise of self-identification. We see it with the LGBTQ plus movement. We see it with kids just almost like searching for that importance, or that they're drawn to themselves. We see that even with adults, where it talks about me time and self-care and all these things. So why are people drawn to this thing? Because in my opinion, and I'll give you my opinion before you give us an answer, but I almost feel like it's an empty endeavor, because the more we focus on ourselves, the less we're able to see what's actually around us, the less we can have gratitude, the less we can almost help people. Why do you think people are so drawn to this? Why is it that we are now living in a culture where your surface identity seems to carry way more value than the content of your character?
People are self-focused. People are self-centered. And I have a hard time getting this concept through to some, but it's just so clear to me, I can't back down from it, that even people who see themselves as, I don't do anything for myself, I'm always trying to please other people, go without in order to provide for others. Even that, if they are willing to really let some light be shed on their heart's true motivations, it's because that happens to be what brings them pleasure, right? They feel safe and happy when people around them are happy. And so even those people that we might on the outside see as selfless are truly quite selfish and focusing on seeking their own pleasure. It's just defined more nicely for them. It looks better on the outside than someone who's just, stealing whatever they want because they want it. That looks bad on the outside, but it's not too different from, between those two people. So because we're self-centered and interested mostly in, pleasing ourselves according to what we think will bring us good experiences, we see the world through that lens. So, and you can see that in societies, like whatever this one society has decided is good, we want everybody else to see it that way too, right? I mean, you can go way back to see that in how different groups of people interact or take over or try to persuade. So because we see ourselves as knowing what is good and what is true, and we really deceive ourselves in letting us think that our view is accurate. It doesn't have to match what we see on the outside, right? And so there maybe used to be more of a conformity of, hey, this is what our group, our society, our community thinks is good and true, and so this is what I also think is good and true. But now we're seeing that it is more individual based, right? And as I think, because people, especially maybe the younger generation, doesn't have as much interactive involvement with like community of different generations, people working together, doing tasks together, relying on each other, focused on, maybe their town or their church or their community. This younger generation isn't getting that sense of, this is what our community believes. And so it's more of a, what do I believe? And let me kind of reach out and ask, hey, I feel this way. And so what does that mean about me? And they're asking these random strangers on the internet to give them guidance on who they are. And so if you're a youth that feels a little confused about who you are, and you ask some stranger, or maybe it's an influencer that isn't strange to you, but they certainly don't know you, and you ask for guidance, they're gonna tell you whatever whatever they want to tell you, like their own unknown motivations for speaking untruth into you. So we're seeing a rise of people just feeling one way, reaching out to strangers for guidance, and then latching onto that, even though it goes against what maybe their family has taught them or their community has taught them. But because there's not that level of interaction, working with the family on things, working in the community on things, this youth can just really go astray and just keep running down this path of whatever I feel is reality. And it's sad to see.
I agree with that. I remember growing up as a kid, you would be out in the community with your friends, but every neighbor knew your parents. Yeah. Every neighbor knew you.
And so they might say like, "Oh, that's not how a cuffie acts."
Exactly.
Like, your mom's not going to like when I tell her you're doing that. And then there's this process you go through of like, "Oh, yeah, I'm a cuffie. Mm-hmm. I need to do this. This is what we do. And I don't want my mom to know I'm doing that," right? And so current day stuff will say, well, that's because you're not free to be your real self, and you feel oppressed and have to act like this family name that's on you, and that you need to just push through that, and it doesn't matter who your family is. It doesn't matter what your mom's taught you. You just need to go be your real self, right? And that wouldn't fly before.
No, not at all.
And where does that end? I mean, what we know, even the people that teach this, that you can be whatever you want to be, however you feel and identify on the inside is who you really are, instead of trying to match that with reality of the physical world. Even those people will agree that feelings change over time. And what a 10-year-old thinks is very different than what a 20-year-old thinks. And
absolutely,
how do you reconcile encouraging someone to go with what their feelings are, and instead of helping them bridge that gap between where they're feeling and what reality is? Like, just help them bridge that gap, right?
Yeah. And I think you said it best earlier when you talked about how a lot of people try to take teenagers and almost cement them into this lifelong thing. And that's almost the same thing that's happening with this self-identification is they're taking these 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, and they're basically saying who you are today is who you're going to be 50 years from now. And I'm not who I was 5 years ago.
Right. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh my gosh. Thank goodness. Yeah. My wife would be very upset if I was the same person that I was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think it's so dangerous, and just the rise of, you see young adults and teenagers. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to blame phones, but they're on their phones. Mm-hmm. And I've seen groups of them that are friends moving about together, and not a single one is talking to each other. Every single one is on their individual device. They don't know how to interact with people. They don't know how to, mm-hmm. they don't have a self-respect. They don't have respect for older people, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And to me, that is where a society can renew itself, is when the older generation can implant really good morals and ideals into the younger generation. And that's where it goes on, because if everyone is held hostage mm-hmm. to what their parents are saying, what's going to happen when you have kids? Are your kids held hostage too? Mm-hmm. You're going to want them to represent your family name. You're going to want them to represent that. And I think it's just a purposeful dismantling mm-hmm. of the family unit and how families are designed. Families are designed to take care of each other and to take care of the community. So where do we go from here then with this next generation? You and I are both in an influential position in both of our roles. So where do we go from here? Where does the listener go from here? How do we turn back the clock or whatever to help these young people really understand the importance of being defined by more than just your surface ID, but mm-hmm. being defined by the community and how God defines you and mm-hmm. how and what you're called to be?
Yeah, realizing that growing up is challenging, right? There's a lot of stuff to figure out. There's a lot of stuff to learn. And for this generation that's growing up now to now have this added component of a huge question to consider, like, did God put me in the wrong body? That's a big question. And that's a question that did not distract us when we were growing up. We didn't have that question asked of us and
That's
thrown
right.
out there. So helping the youth not get distracted by that question, right? Because it's simply a distraction. God did not put you in the wrong body. You might have a difficult time feeling comfortable and safe in your body. And let's look at why that is, because there's reasons why that is. For some people, it could be they experienced some kind of trauma related to their body or related to how they saw other people's bodies being used, or even maybe a power difference in their home between a man and a woman. Whatever the scenario, right? We can help that youth see how and why they're believing they would rather be different than who God made them to be. But then also help them look past that, right? Like part of why so many youth are trying now to be a different gender, to act a different gender, or believe that they're in the wrong body physically, is because they've been taught that if they make this change, it would solve a lot of their problems. And so they're taught to idolize this concept that, and you know, time will pass and time will tell. We're seeing some of this already, but that people learn the hard way. If you were to transition, say, to a different, especially physically, if you were to transition, it turns out you're still you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nowhere you can go to get away from you. And that's not a bad thing. It just takes wanting to accept the love that God has for you, and to know and accept that he doesn't make mistakes. And we as a society, because we think that whatever we think and feel is accurate, and we judge things as if we're God, that there are some mistakes, right? If we start down the road of believing that, especially as Christians, if we start down the road believing that God messed up, where does that end, right? And some Christians are already over this slippery slope and think that, and have lost the concept of the sanctity of life, where we judge with pregnancies if it's a pregnancy that I'm wanting, or I feel safe having, or is at an okay time, or with an okay person, then there's value to this life. But otherwise, there's not. And I can do whatever I want with this life. And that's not much different of a concept than, hey, I don't feel comfortable in my own body, and I think that God made a mistake, and I think I'm really a boy. Because we're standing in the seat of judgment at that point. Like, we're saying that it doesn't matter what reality is. We're going with what we think and feel about it, instead of realizing that our thoughts and feelings are deceived. Like, we don't see clearly. And we know that as adults. We know that because, like we said before, you know, we don't think the way we did when we were children. We think differently now, and that's going to continue. So right now, today, I mean, there's some things I can speak with, like, a surety that there are some basic principles and concepts that are true and real, but that's not because they come from my head, right? They come from more God's word, and what people that are wiser and have walked through figuring out what is truth, that's where these ideas come from, right? So I can hold on to these principles and concepts and know that the way I think and feel is going to continue to change as I age, and have different experiences, but there are some principles and foundational concepts that just are what they are.
You're right. And I do agree with you there. It's almost, no, let's call it what it is. It's a perversion of how God designed things. And we know that Satan can't create anything new, right? So what he has to do is take whatever God deemed for good and make it perverted for his own way. So we see, like you said, the sanctity of life. I am wholeheartedly against the idea of abortion because I believe that every life needs to have an opportunity, every single life. Does that mean that bad things don't happen? No, that doesn't mean that. My wife and I had 4 miscarriages. I understand the pain of what it means to lose your kid. But I believe that God designed life to help bring forth more life. So if we are taking it upon ourselves to say, like you said, we are in the judgment seats. We know more than God. We who are beings that live at max 120 years at this point. We know so much more than God because of how we think it and how we believe it. That's a complete distortion.
Right.
And you know, and that's the same thing. Like, it's just, I just feel like every single thing that God has put here for our good is being attacked.
Yeah.
And as believers,
including God.
Yeah,
right?
including God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually listening to this Glenn Beck podcast, and